Meet the most deformed king in history. The very first time Queen Elizabeth saw her son, she thought that he was bewitched. But why? Why did the queen think that her own child was bewitched? And what had made him so deformed? This is the story of one of the most evil curses in history, and how it affected the entire British royal family. It all started with Queen Elizabeth's sister. She was the real villain of this story. Once upon a time, while looking at her reflection in the mirror, she thought to herself, "I wish I looked younger." Suddenly, a small yet sinister voice answered her, "You shall have your wish." And just like that, her wish came true. However, no one noticed anything weird, not even the queen. Only Elizabeth knew how much her sister had changed after that day. She wasn't as kind and gentle as she once was. Instead, she became cold and cruel. However, the queen had no idea that this was only the beginning of the curse. The full story was far more sinister than that. Soon, the queen became pregnant, and everyone was happy for her because she would finally give them an heir. But the queen wasn't as happy as everyone else. She didn't want to get pregnant, but when she told her husband about it, he got really angry and said, "We will discuss this later." Little did the queen know that he already had a mistress, and he wanted another child with her. The queen couldn't tell him no, so she was forced to carry out her pregnancy. But soon, her behavior began to change. She became a lot more secretive and kept throwing tantrums without any reason. Her whole demeanor had changed. The queen was also extremely paranoid and thought that everyone was out to get her. That's why she decided to lock herself up in her room, leaving the kingdom without a ruler for many months. Eventually, she gave birth to a baby boy and named him Edward. But even after giving birth, the queen's behavior didn't change. In fact, it got worse. She became even more suspicious and violent, which scared the royal staff. No one wanted to go near her. And soon, everyone began to say that she was bewitched. Even though she was the most important woman in the kingdom, no one could help her. They were all terrified of her. Not only did she have a psychotic episode after giving birth, but her son Edward was also born deformed. He had a huge bump on his head, and doctors had no idea how to treat him. So they asked the queen to take him to a church and pray for his recovery. At first, they thought that maybe God would help him, but sadly, he didn't. As Edward grew up, so did his deformity. He had a large lump on his head that only got bigger with each passing year. His condition was getting worse, and no one could help him. Soon, he became the most deformed prince in England, and the whole nation was worried. They had never seen anything like this before. What had happened to the royal family? Some people even went as far as to say that the queen sold her soul to the devil in exchange for power and beauty. Others believed that the queen had been cursed by a witch. However, no one knew the truth. As Edward grew older, he became more and more depressed. He hated going outside and meeting new people. After all, everyone would make fun of his appearance. Sadly, his father was no longer the king. When Edward was born, his father had passed away. That meant that Edward would now become the king. But how could anyone take him seriously? He couldn't even walk properly because of his deformity. When Edward was 16 years old, his mother passed away. Now he had become the most powerful man in England, but no one respected him. Everyone called him a freak behind his back, and no one wanted to work for him. But Edward was a good person, despite everything he had gone through. He tried to unite the country and bring everyone together. But as soon as he stepped outside, people laughed at him. They had never seen such a strange-looking king. But Edward was determined to rule the kingdom despite his appearance. And for that, he needed an army. Unfortunately, no one wanted to join his army. They were afraid of being associated with a freak. However, there was one group of men who didn't care what he looked like. They were called the Yeomen of the Guard, and they had sworn to protect the king no matter what. They were the only ones who would stand by him until the end. For a while, it seemed like Edward wouldn't be able to defeat the enemy. However, when the battle began, these brave guards stood in front of him and protected him from harm. They showed everyone that loyalty was more important than their king's appearance. But there was still one problem. Even though Edward had loyal guards, he needed a wife. Unfortunately, no one wanted to marry him because he was so deformed. But one day, a young girl named Wallace caught the king's eye. She was beautiful and smart, and Edward knew that she was the one. But Wallace's parents didn't like the king at all. They thought that he was a monster and that no decent girl should marry him. They begged her not to marry him, but she didn't listen. Wallace loved Edward and wanted to marry him no matter what people said. On their wedding day, everyone laughed at Wallace. They thought that she had lost her mind. How could she marry a man who looked like a monster? But she didn't care what anyone thought of her. She loved her husband, and that's all that mattered. As the years passed, Edward became more and more ill. He was tired of living a life where everyone hated him. He didn't even want to be the king anymore. And that's when he asked his friend, Lord Brownlow, to help him abdicate the throne. This way, his brother George would become the new king instead of him. But George didn't want to take the throne either. He preferred living a peaceful life as a prince. That's why he refused to become the king. In the end, Edward's brother George became the new king and ruled the kingdom for over 40 years. However, no one knows what would have happened if George had accepted the throne. Maybe he would have become a great king, or maybe he would have made the same mistakes as his brother. After giving up the throne, Edward moved to France with his wife. There, he lived a quiet life away from the public eye. For many years, no one knew where he was or how he was living. But eventually, his secret was revealed, and people found out that he was living in France all along. It's hard to imagine how difficult it must have been for Edward to live his life the way he did. He was born into a royal family and had everything that he could have ever wanted. But his appearance made everyone hate him. No one wanted to be around him, not even his own family. Edward was just 16 when he became the king, and unfortunately, he didn't have anyone to guide him. That's why he made so many mistakes. If he had been born in modern times, he would have received treatment for his condition. He would have been able to live a more normal life. However, back then, doctors weren't able to help him. And that's why he became the most bullied king in history. Some people say that he was too naive and innocent to be the king of England. Others believe that he was cursed by a witch. Whatever the reason, there's no denying that he was one of the most unlucky kings in history. Now tell me in the comments, do you think that Edward was cursed or not? And do you think that his brother George did the right thing by taking his throne? Now see these videos to find out about the most evil curse in history. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already.